We're about 3.5 weeks away from Easter, and over the next 4 weeks, just going to spend some time each Wednesday looking forward to what we celebrate at Easter and remember in the story of Jesus, and also how Jesus in his life and ministry began to predict and say what was going to happen to him on the cross. It's interesting that, there's multiple times when Jesus says what's coming and what's going to happen, that he's going to be betrayed, that he's going to be handed over and condemned and crucified and killed, but then ultimately that he will rise again. The first time in Matthew's Gospel when Jesus mentions this is actually just after Peter recognizes who Jesus is. Lots of people have been wondering who Jesus is, and Peter recognizes him, that he's the Messiah, he's the king who's come to save them. And it's interesting, just after that, Jesus makes this prediction. He says this in Matthew 16, verse 21. It says, "From that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed and on the third day be raised to life." It's interesting because just after this, Peter, perhaps feeling pretty confident because he's just recognized who Jesus is, basically starts to talk Jesus out of this. It says this in the next verse: "Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. 'Never, Lord,' he said, 'this shall never happen to you.'" So this is pretty bold from Peter, who's just said that Jesus is the king and the Messiah, but then says to Jesus, "Well, hang on, Jesus, no, you're not going to go to the cross, you're not going to suffer, I'm not going to let that happen." And in some ways, that's a normal response, right? Like, it's a normal to want to stop someone from suffering, or especially from suffering unjustly, and especially someone we love. And Peter definitely loved Jesus and had put his hope in him. So perhaps the thought of Jesus dying, let alone being publicly executed, was probably too much for Peter to bear. So he says to Jesus, no, Jesus, that's not going to happen. But Jesus responds to Peter very strongly. In the next verse, it says, Jesus turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." So it seems like it's a normal human concern to stop Jesus going to the cross, to stop suffering. But Jesus says, well, no, what's important is the concerns of God, the plans and purposes of God. And Peter, even though well-intentioned in his desire to stop Jesus going to the cross, is actually opposing the purposes of God. And the ultimate one who is behind opposing the purposes of God in the scriptures is Satan, Jesus' enemy. So Jesus says that what Peter is doing and saying, probably well-intentioned, is actually the work of, in a sense, speaking on behalf of Jesus' enemy, opposing God's purpose for his life, which is to go to the cross. So Jesus is pretty direct with Peter, but then actually, interestingly, goes on and doesn't just talk about his own journey to the cross, but actually talks about everyone who follows him. There needs to be a journey with a cross, in a sense. It says this in the next verse: "Then Jesus said to his disciples, 'Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it.'" It's a pretty amazing thing for Jesus to say. Basically, it's not just him that's going to the cross and needs to embrace the cross, but he calls all who follow him to embrace the cross, to live with the purpose of God in mind, not just living by human concerns. Because a normal human concern is to anxiously seek to save and protect our lives. That's a very normal human thing to do. But here, Jesus says to anxiously, in a sense of control, try to protect and save your life is the sure way to lose it. It's so easy to do that, right? Because the opposite of that, the idea of dying and embracing death and a cross, is completely unnatural to us. But Jesus says with great seriousness that that is the path forward, and it's a life and death situation. So I want to read this quote from Dallas Willard, kind of summarizing and adding some insight to some other thoughts as to what Jesus is saying and what it means for us. He says this: deny yourself and follow Christ, or deny Christ and follow yourself. Those are the options. The results: saving your life or losing it. Death to self means releasing all our desires, our reputation, our glory, and having our way with other people, everything. A dead person does not continue to have just a little life left in them. So when it comes to our death to self, we have to say, Lord, give it to me. I will take it. I will lay it all down for you. So as we approach Easter and reflect on Jesus' prediction of his cross and his willingness to embrace the cross and his willingness to embrace God's purpose and plan for his life, which involved the cross, it's an opportunity for us to identify how we sometimes are like Peter, and perhaps we don't oppose Jesus' death, but maybe we oppose our own death to self and instead attempt to control and protect and hold and save our own lives, when Jesus' invitation and really way forward is to embrace death to self and to even ask God for God's grace to deny ourselves, take up his cross and follow him. So just a couple of questions perhaps to reflect on today. What would it look like to give up needing to have things my way and instead submit to God's plans and purposes for my life, whatever they are? And do I truly believe Jesus when he says that the way to find life is to lose it for his sake? And what does that look like in my life today?